Welcome to the Invest with Clarity podcast, where you will learn how success in investing, as in life, is the result of absolute clarity. Mark Pearson of Nepsis in Minneapolis, Minnesota, shares his passion for portfolio management and commitment to transparency and communication to allow investors to fully understand what they own and why, bringing them to clarity in their investments. And now, here are your co-hosts, Matt Halloran and Mark Pearson.
Hello and welcome to episode number 3 with Mark Pearson. Today, Mark's going to go over the 4 keys to investing for success. Now, why don't you give us a little bit of history here, Mark, because I'm assuming that these have come out of your experience or specific examples in life. So where did these 4 keys come from?
Well, started a long time ago, about 20 years ago. Probably over 20 years ago when I started managing money for investors. And as I felt and believed in process, in other words, successful investing was about process, before I was going to take on the responsibility of managing money, I wanted to understand to the full extent what the disciplines were and what the process was going to be for being a successful investor. And as part of that process, I understood that there were scientific aspects of investing, but there was also, in my opinion, more importantly, Matt, behavioral aspects of investing. So as we developed what we call the 4 keys, the corners of success, 4 corners of successful investing, they basically were the outcome of developing this investment process.
All right, let's jump right into the first one, which you told me was philosophy. Now, that's a really heavy thing to start with here. So where did the philosophy, tell us what you mean by that, because I think it's very important for operational definitions when we're doing a podcast like this, because you're going to use 4 very specific words. And I want to make sure that all of the listeners understand what you mean by those words. So what do you mean by philosophy?
Well, first of all, Matt, as you know, go big or go home.
Let's
start with the big words right away, right?
Absolutely.
Let's go right to battle. And when we talk about philosophy, of course, we're referring to the investment philosophy. And the investment philosophy really is one of the 2 scientific components of your investment process. And I'll get into the idea of scientific later. But the philosophy really begins with the 2 core basic pieces of the philosophy, which are you an investor who believes in modern portfolio theory, which in other words is invest in the entire stock market world, buy small cap, mid cap, large cap, buy value, buy growth, buy international, buy all this stuff, right? So you own thousands of companies in your portfolio. Or do you believe in the Warren Buffett school of thought, which is investing really is about investing in great businesses and continually investing in those businesses over time. And as part of that philosophy, you want to include things like how should I be diversified? How should I be asset allocated? What percentages of positions do I want to own in my portfolio? What is going to be my buy discipline and sell discipline, which of course we'll talk about in another podcast. But the philosophy really begins with what do I believe in how my money should be managed and invested.
Now, when you take clients through your intake process, you have a formalized intake discovery process to uncover this stuff. Is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement. We start with the investment policy and objective setting questionnaire, and then we develop an investment policy statement from that. Correct.
Number 2, what is the second key to investing for success?
Well, as I said earlier, Matt, you've got the scientific aspect of the investing, or I call it the empirical data, the numbers, if you will, your philosophy, and then your strategy. Your strategy is the second one. Now you've developed the philosophy. Okay, now what is the strategy? How many companies do I want to own in my portfolio? What type of companies or investments do I want to have? What type of bonds or hard assets, whatever they may be in terms of the type of assets that you're going to own. Where are you going to own those? How many positions do I want to have in the portfolio? Do I have any sort of brand identity I want to have in that strategy? And of course, as part of the strategy, one of the most important aspects is how do I handle volatility? How do I execute on volatility? Of course, as you know, we use strategic cost averaging. And as part of that strategy, we want to fundamentally understand at the end of the day why we own what we own. Of course, Invest with Clarity is all about knowing what you own and why you own it. And so strategy really has a major component of managing, if you will, your strategic cost averaging into the companies you want to own and your execution of how you sell from those positions in the portfolio as well.
What happens, Mark, if somebody doesn't want to own something? So you were talking about other companies you want to own. What happens if there's people on the other side of the fence and they say, my father died from lung cancer, I don't want to have. So what do you do about that? Yeah,
that's a great question. That's one of the great benefits, Matt, of an SMA. Of course, at investwithclarity.com, we are all about knowing what you own and why you own it. And for one of those reasons is exactly what you're just asking. What if there are industries? We see people who don't want to own energy. We see people who don't want any affiliation with alcohol, with pornography, with abortion, with guns. There's a host of different reasons why people may decide they don't want to own a certain company or a certain sector. And at investwithclarity.com, of course, our process as part of those 4 keys is the SMA approach, the separately managed account, which means the client's money is not commingled with anyone else's. And as I addressed earlier, you have your investment policy statement. So as that investment policy statement is being designed, we discuss those areas that you may not want to be invested in, and they are included in the execution of that plan. And because of an SMA, because a separately managed account gives you complete flexibility, the third leg of the stool, by the way, of being able to know what you own and why you own it, the process that investwithclarity.com uses, what we use here at Nepsis, enables that investor to have complete freedom in understanding what they want to own and not own, as well as knowing what they own and why they own it. Before we jump to flexibility, the third key here, you're talking about an investment policy statement, and for our less familiar with the terminology that we use on podcasts like this, I want you to dive just a little bit deeper into 2 things that you just said there. First off is the IPS, or investment policy statement, and then the second one is, again, SMA. And you just highlighted what that means, but everybody who's listening, when you think about these 4 keys, and when Mark is talking about these 4 keys, these 2 pieces, the investment policy statement and the SMA aspect of it, are so important. Separately managed account, so important to you understanding this whole component. I just want to rewind you just a little bit. So my first question here is, with the IPS, the investment policy statement, if I'm hearing you correctly, that is a tailored document to the person that you're sitting across from. Now, that's rare. Yeah. Yes. Well, look, why is it rare? Hold on. You just said yes very quickly because you know it's rare. But why is it rare? Oh, Matt, you ask such good questions. Why is it rare? Yeah. Well, fundamentally, I don't know, because I believe it's probably one of the most important documents to have. Now, I can give you my speculation as to why I think it's rare, and here's what it is. I think one of the problems with the financial services industry, Matt, is the industry has attempted to make investing as easy as possible for investors by putting them into boxes, so to speak. This is why you see such a big push for owning index ETFs and a race to the bottom in the fees of ETFs. Now, there are other reasons why I think that's happening. You've heard me probably say many times, in the absence of value, thus becomes cost. And the question then becomes, how valuable is an IPS? How valuable is an SMA? And we'll unpack that in a few minutes here. But to get back to why people don't have them, a lot of the money, and most of the money, I would guess, that individual investors have is managed by financial advisors. Okay? And financial advisors, many of them think they are money managers because they pick investment vehicles for their investments to be in. But, a lot of those investments are managed by other managers, right? Mutual funds, ETFs, they may use other forms of separately managed accounts, whatever the case may be. There's a money manager tied to each bucket that they're investing in, right? And so at the end of the day, what happens is these financial advisors get this notion that they're money managers. And whenever I meet a money manager, Matt, the first question I ask them when they tell me they're a money manager is, because I want to learn from them, I say, can you tell me what's your largest holding? And, I had this one time I said to this guy, so what's your largest holding? He says, well, it's American Funds Growth Fund of America. Oh, jeez. I said, well, that's great, but what's the largest holding?
Okay,
he says, well, that is my largest holding.
So let's clarify
said,
that.
Money manager?
Yeah, so let's clarify that.
And I said, well, you don't even know what your largest holding is because a mutual fund is not an investment.
That's right.
A mutual fund is a vehicle that holds investments, and this is important for investors to understand. And not knowing what is in that investment vehicle can be scary. It's kind of like the analogy I'll use for you is when you go buy a used car. You don't know the history of the car, really. I mean, you got kind of a baseline. You've got the historical maintenance records. We refer to that as the historical returns. But that doesn't mean when you drive it off the lot, the thing blows up, catches on fire, and the car's worthless. Because you don't know what's going to happen in the future when you buy that used car. And you can do as much due diligence on that as you want, but at the end of the day, it's still a used car. And what happened in the past with the car is really irrelevant to the extent of what's going to happen in the future. So going back to the original point of the question, the answer here is that financial advisors have this preconceived notion that they're money managers. They're not. Now, I'm sure there are some that really are money managers that actually pick individual investments as part of an asset allocation strategy. But for the most part, they're not. And there are a lot of financial advisors, Matt, that will tell you, I'm not a money manager. My job is just to guide and lead my clients. And those are the best kind of advisors because they know where their strengths are. Because you can't be a money manager and a financial advisor. You can't do enough due diligence in the process. And so I believe, to get to the core of your question, why most clients do not have an investment policy statement is because financial advisors don't even know what they are most of the time, have never used them, and frankly, don't take the time to put them together and can't put them together because they don't even really understand what their investment philosophy and strategy is because they're basing a lot of their decisions on historical returns of mutual funds or ETFs. That's a long-winded answer, but that's the answer.
But that totally lends us right into the whole idea of an SMA, a separately managed account, which does lead us to point number 3, the key number 3, which is flexibility.
Yes.
Explain a separately managed account because this is something so different because the question that you had asked the advisor, what's your largest holding in that advisor said American funds, right?
Yep.
That is not a separately managed account. And so now just to give a little bit of history, from what you just said there, a lot of advisors want to make the investment process as easy as possible with a race to the bottom of the fees. Having a separately managed account is more difficult because they can't just do massive trades across every single solitary person's account with an SMA. An SMA means that's Mark Pearson's account. Mark Pearson has these holdings. If we're going to do something, we have to do it in Mark Pearson's account. Is that a fair statement?
Kind of.
Oh, good. Well, then clarify. Good.
Go ahead.
No. I want to know where I fell short there. I mean, you're the expert here, dude. So
the only thing that I would push back on there is that we actually do trades across all accounts.
Okay.
So it's called block trading. An SMA still affords the ability, if I'm going to go buy Johnson & Johnson, I've got a target percentage of what I want to own in each model, each investment model, whether it's income all the way up to growth. There's a percentage we want to own. And so we'll buy the stock, and then we'll allocate it to the percentages that we have targeted in each portfolio. Now, if a client comes to me and says, or comes to their advisor and says, I don't want to own anything having to do with drugs, with biotech, with anything related to that, then we would exclude J&J from being allocated to their portfolio.
Right. Gotcha.
So you have ultimate flexibility there, but we still are able to efficiently and effectively manage the thousands of accounts that we do for the client's behalf. Now, circling back to your point about the power of flexibility in the SMA, yes, managing an SMA is more difficult, takes more work, not just about the allocating because Matt may not want to own gun stocks and Mark does, or Sally doesn't want to own alcohol but everybody else does, and we can take those out of the portfolio. That's one function or one benefit of the separately managed account, but there are some other huge benefits. One is the ability to be more efficient and more effective in the tax management of the account when it comes to a non-IRA account. So for an example, if a client has a portfolio and comes to us and says, hey, I need $20,000 to buy a car, we can go into that individual portfolio, see what we own in there relative to the target we want to own, and see where we have the greatest benefit for tax efficiency in that, and take the money from those areas. Conversely, we can also say, we've got big gains in this company. Let's take some profit off the table, use that cash as part of that $20,000 or your monthly income needs. Particularly when you're in retirement, SMAs I think are hugely important because you have so much greater flexibility. And as investors worry, Matt, about volatility, the fact of the matter is that in retirement, if your portfolio is allocated according to the IPS, the investment policy statement, you shouldn't worry about the volatility because the SMA provides the flexibility to sell in the best areas possible during volatile periods to keep the portfolio moving as efficiently and as effectively as possible. Here's the last thing.
Okay.
As you know, Nepsis is a Greek word which means to be watchful, alert, and vigilant with a clear and sober mind against illusions and fear, thus allowing one to obtain ultimate clarity. As we get into the flexibility part, you get your philosophy and strategy. Those are the empirical, scientific pieces. Your flexibility, and the fourth one we'll talk about in a few minutes here, the transparency. These are the behavioral components of the 4 keys to investing. Flexibility and transparency are equally as important to the empirical data because they are what enable you to stick to the process, the proven process in investing. And with flexibility, with Nepsis, ultimate clarity, the ability to know what you own and why you own it while you're taking withdrawals or while you're adding to your portfolio is a layer of transparency. It's a layer of clarity that most investors don't have, which, as you have heard me say before, one of the reasons why everybody's going to indexed ETFs is because they don't see the value they're getting from their advisor because they're saying, you know what, I could just pick the funds in ETFs too. And so why don't I just do it as cheap as possible? And these funds don't do well anyway, so I might as well do it as cheap as possible, which is like saying, I like hamburgers, so I might as well just go eat McDonald's hamburgers because they're the cheapest. That's illogical, don't you think?
And not very tasty, but that's a totally different story.
Agreed.
All right. I love this. This first off makes me happy because this is a very, very important podcast for people to understand what they should be expecting in this last section, which is transparency, is something that our industry has always been told doesn't do a good job. So how do you do the 4th key to investing for success differently?
Yeah, great. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one of the problems with the investment world is investors seek to look for the answers to what can help them be successful in investing. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, Matt. I've heard it many times and even heard it the other day, which is it's time to get back to the basics. And the basics, in the opinion of Nepsis, is that the greatest wealth that's ever been created since the inception of time has been by investing in businesses and continually investing in those great businesses over time. And that's part of the flexibility of the strategic cost averaging. It's part of the strategy. Where the transparency becomes important is the idea of clarity. It's the idea of knowing what you own and why you own it. And because we're an SMA, a separately managed account, what that enables us to do is, as we're investing for your portfolio, you can literally log in and look at your account and literally see every buy and sell of every position, every company or every bond or every hard asset, whatever it is that we own in your portfolio, you are able to go into your account and see that at any time. Now, why is this important? Interestingly enough, Matt, I got an email today from a person that we work with who is talking to some financial advisors about our money management, right? And of course, financial advisors are not used to this whole idea of knowing what you own and why you own it, and this whole idea of investing with clarity, right? So this guy sends me an email over asking me, literally, so can you tell me, quick question, how many clients left you throughout the 2008 and 2009 fiasco? And he says, I know it's probably not a simple black and white answer, but how many clients left us during the financial crisis? I can tell him easily on one hand. And the reason for that, Matt, was because of transparency. Giving the client the ability to connect with what they're really investing in. I mean, if you see a great company go down in value 40, 50%, like many companies did during the financial crisis, common sense would say that's probably a buying opportunity. I mean, Johnson & Johnson is not going to go away, or Intel or Microsoft, whatever the company was at that time, right? So when you can give the investor a sense of clarity, a sense of understanding what they own and why they own it in the first place, they then begin to embrace volatility and say, you know what? This is a huge sale. I mean, I talk about this all the time. Amazingly, people love to go shopping. It's one of the busiest shopping days of the year. What day is it?
Black Friday.
The day after Christmas.
Oh, the day after Christmas. You're right. Why is that?
Christmas.
I know. Yeah.
Because
everything's on sale. That's so smart.
Everybody. Yep. And why do so many people go out on Black Friday after Thanksgiving?
That's right. Huge
because
sales,
of all the sales they're launching, that people want a good deal. Everybody wants a good deal. The difference in the financial services industry is investors haven't been taught that. Investors have been taught that volatility is bad. I saw an annuity commercial today. Invest in an annuity basically because then you don't have to worry about the volatility. Well, crap, Matt. If your portfolio is appropriately asset allocated to the investment policy statement and to your tolerance for risk and investment goals, volatility should mean jack squat to you because your transparency and your flexibility enable you to stick to the proven philosophy and strategy.
Yeah. These are the 4 keys to investing for success with Mark Pearson. Well, number 1 was philosophy, number 2, strategy, 3, flexibility, and 4, transparency. You know, what makes me really happy about these podcasts is if you don't get excited about your level of excitement about what you're talking about, I think the people on the other end of these microphones are not alive. I love your passion, dude. And honestly, for our listeners, listen to other financial services podcasts because unfortunately they're out there and you will see a humongous difference between how Mark, his level of excitement and passion and consistency of his message across all of these podcasts. Mark, I just want to thank you very much. Do you have any closing statements that you'd like to make on the 4 keys to investing for success?
Well, the only thing I would say is certainly thank you for the kind words. And, I've told people I retired a long time ago. I am extremely passionate, whether you invest with Nepsis or not, in helping people invest with clarity. And that is Nepsis. So I appreciate the comments.
You're very welcome. And if you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure you click the subscribe now button below, because then what will happen is every time Mark comes out with a new podcast, it'll be delivered directly to your listening device. Mark, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Matt.
We'll see everybody on the other side of the mic very soon.
The content discussed is for informational purposes only. It is not a solicitation or recommendation for any securities that may be mentioned herein. Advisory services offered through Nepsis Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor.